Welcome, my friends, to the Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Today, Robert Bonomo returns to the show. Robert has a new film out titled Twilight of the Archons. It's a fabulous, thought-provoking presentation. The link is in the description box below. The discussion with Robert was wide-ranging as we share our thoughts on consciousness and what this realm might be all about. And so, without further ado, here's the interview with Robert. Well, folks, we have a great show today, and Robert Bonomo is back on the show. Robert was on, I guess it was about 2 years ago, Robert, when you had your first film out, The 21 Faces of God. Actually, I said it was your first film, but it may not have been. Was it your first film?
Yeah.
It was. Okay. It was a fantastic film. And what I'll do is I will put the link down in the description box below for people to rewatch it because it was really fabulous. It's about the tarot deck, and I won't do a spoiler. Just watch it, and it will be an eye-opener. And you recently released your second film, Twilight of the Archons, and I guess you released that earlier this month?
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago.
And I watched the whole thing, and it runs around 45 minutes, and it is an extraordinary film. I loved it because you you dive into the whole aspect of consciousness.
Yeah.
Which to me is so important. I talk about it a lot myself, and unfortunately, sometimes I feel like I'm just preaching to myself or preaching to a small choir because most people really don't have an understanding of the whole aspect of consciousness and how consciousness will create the reality.
Yes.
You know, they just can't get their heads wrapped around that, and so they hear the words, but it doesn't go beyond just hearing words. So when I watched your film, Twilight of the Archons, I loved it. I thought to myself, okay, this is the type of stuff that I enjoy because you're being very introspective, very reflective, and you're digging deep. You're going into what I believe to be the real issue that humanity confronts. Everything else that most people focus on is a veneer, and by continuing to focus on that stuff, you're not going to change anything. What you're going to do, because your focus is there, is you're going to make that reality even stronger.
That's exactly it.
So what I wanted to ask you, Robert, before we get started is how long did it take you to put the film together? Because first of all, your voiceovers were great. I want to say that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you did a great job with the voiceovers. How long did it take you to put the film together?
The original idea I had in around 2016, it's like they both popped up. The 21 Faces of God in this film, they popped up at the same time. I almost stopped making the 21 Faces of God to go make this. I got stuck. I got stuck at the Fool. But a friend of mine pushed me. He said, no, finish it. So the idea has been percolating for 5 or so years. In 2018, I really started working on it. And I have to watch lots and lots of films.
Yep.
Take my clips, and then I write the script, and then I kind of fit it together, and then it's like this whole process. So I would say about 2 or 3 years of collecting and about 8 months of just real work. So there's a collection process, and then there's a editing process, and then I always get stuck. So I started this pre-corona. So I had it going. I was pretty well into it. And then the whole thing just blew up. With the whole coronavirus in that summer, I had to rethink it, go back, and start basically from zero again. So I almost gave it up because I thought, it's a different world. But like you said, I was focusing on consciousness. And when I understood that the film was really about consciousness, then I said, okay, I can finish this.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks don't realize how much effort it takes to put something together like that. There is a script that you have to write, and of course the script is built around all of the research that you have compiled. I mean, I do similar types of work on other topics, and it takes a long time. And you can get stuck because you can reach a certain point and you're thinking to yourself, okay, so where do I go from here? And you want to make sure it fits into the overall story that you're telling. You don't want to go off on a tangent someplace, And it all has to tie back in the end. That's the thing, right? Whenever you do something like this, you can chug along, but you always have to keep a pulse on the fact that it has to tie back to what it is that you want to present at the end. It has to have a conclusion, right? A logical conclusion.
That is so true, because any work of art, you have to create a tension. You have to create that conflict. But then you have to resolve it.
Right.
The difference between a lot of good music or good films and great films is that resolution. You create a great conflict, but the resolution is, iffy. When I teach students about, the plot points in a film, take a film like Casablanca. You created the ultimate conflict, but how do you resolve that? And the resolution in Casablanca is perfect. I mean, that's the perfect, they threaded the needle. So yeah, you create that conflict, and it's funny. The conflict here, I finished this film once. Again, I didn't like it, and then I came upon the idea of bliss as love, and then when I bring in 1 Corinthians from Blue, because that at the end that's 1 Corinthians or 1 Corinthians 13.
Yes.
And then I was like, that's it, and you have that feeling like, yeah, this will work.
So, Robert, I was very intrigued by the title of the film, Twilight of the Archons, and why did you choose the word Twilight?
I've always loved that word and that time of day, and I used it for my second novel, which I wrote, oh my God, back in 2000. No, I wrote that novel in the late 1990s, early 2000. So I always had sort of a love affair with that word, and I was also very influenced by Gnosticism. So the Archons in Gnosticism are the controllers. In a sense, if you look at it astrologically, they would be the planetary gods, the ones who control this dimension. So Twilight of the Archons is a little bit like it's the end of the Archons. We've reached the end of that control. And I think one of the keys to the film is we think that the Archons are out there. And I try and make the case at the end. So there's a little bit of a tease there, like, all right, who are these guys? And then it comes back, well, it's actually you.
Right.
The Archons are us. There is no them.
Yeah, that was great because that's how I viewed it also. As I mentioned earlier when we first got started here, it's about your thoughts, it's about your consciousness, and you create your reality. So if you're going to constantly look outside of yourself, then you're always going to have the issue of not being yourself. That was a very, very good point that you made in the film, and I agreed with it. The other thing I wanted to ask you, too, is now we talked about the Archons going back to Gnosticism. Could you help the audience a little bit with just a quick overview of the Gnostic belief system?
Yeah, sure. So there are a couple key elements to what we would call Gnosticism. If you go back to the original Christianity, there would be, say, mainstream traditional Christianity, which would, I guess you would say, would be completely formed and baked maybe the 3rd, 4th century. And then you had a separate Gnostic cosmology that was quite different. In the Gnostic cosmology, there are a couple elements that are key. One is the feminine. Think of it this way. There's a God beyond God, the original God. Sophia, wisdom, is connected to that God, and she creates something when she looks away from the real God, the real source. So she creates something that's disconnected. And in the Gnostic cosmology, this is very important. The world here, there's something wrong with it. It's very important in Gnosticism.
Right.
That there's something not right here. That's one of the big differences between, say, Gnosticism and like Vedanta or Hinduism or Buddhism. So there's the concept that there's something wrong here and there's a redeemer. But that redeemer in Christianity is often a blood sacrifice, especially in the Catholic sense, where there's an actual sacrifice. In Gnosticism, it's a redemption. So what happens is Jesus comes through Sophia. So Sophia and Jesus are, in the Gnostic sense, almost brother and sister. And what they do is, in the Gnostic idea, there is no idea of this death of where, you die and there's a sacrifice. So there's a transcendence through knowledge. You know God personally. That's another key element in Gnosticism. You actually know. There's no intermediary. And then there's many different Gnostic schools, and there's a lot of questions in academia now. Can we even use the word? Does it mean anything? Because the definitions can get a little vague sometimes.
I read John Lash's book.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
I read that book years ago. I found it fascinating. One of the other concepts, and tell me if I've got this right or wrong, is that there is the creator God that you just spoke about, but then there's the demiurge.
Exactly. The half maker, that Platonic idea of, now in some Gnostic schools, the demiurge is kind of neutral. It would be sort of a neutral God, but in other ones, the demiurge is actually evil, working against us. So for example, in the Gnostic Adam and Eve story, everything is reversed. The snake is actually Sophia, and that God is actually evil. Do you see what I mean? They switch it around.
Okay, because I know a lot of folks who banter around Gnosticism will talk about the fact that the God of this world is the demiurge, and he's not the creator God. So now that would mean, from a biblical perspective, you correct me again if I'm wrong, people coming from that school of Gnosticism would say that Yahweh is the demiurge?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. From the Gnostic perspective, Yahweh would be considered either neutral or negative. And there's a God beyond Yahweh, who is the God beyond God. And so the God of Yahweh doesn't know who he really is. You see, because when Sophia created him, she looked away. She was disconnected.
I just want to make sure that I set the stage a little bit for some folks, that because there are many folks that won't know really what Gnosticism is, and so just a little baseline. And again, folks, as Robert said, there are different viewpoints within Gnosticism, just like there are different sects within religion or any belief system. So just make sure you keep that in mind as well. Now, Robert, to move to the whole, I think the main premise of your film, which is consciousness, what were you trying to get out to the audience with regard to consciousness?
I mean, I would honestly say exactly what you said. And I liked what you said about the veneer. So this actually goes back to how we perceive. And I think for all of us, there comes a point when we realize the world out there that we see as real, no, from most of our lives, how real is that world? And this, it's just basic neuroscience, right? That, what we see, what we perceive, what we hear is a reproduction of the world out there. I mean, when you see a tree that's green, you say, okay, that leaf is green, but where is the greenness? The greenness is in our minds. Our minds create that greenness to identify it as a leaf for whatever evolutionary purposes we need to know, green and red and et cetera, right? But the greenness, the redness, this is in our minds. This is where we live. And from a philosophical standpoint, if you go back, say, to Hume, he made the point that, we never actually contact the material world. It's only through our perceptions, this picture in our mind. Now, this may seem a little bit abstract, but that's the key point. Like, are you familiar with Donald Hoffman?
No.
The neuroscientist? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who talk about it, and this is basic science. No one will argue with this. But how well do we actually know this reality, that the base reality? We don't. We perceive it, and we have a common perception, so there is an objective reality out there somewhere, right? Because we both see the chair. But what are we actually seeing? We're seeing a reproduction of the chair in our minds, right?
Right.
When we touch the chair, it's an electrical impulse that goes to our brain. So when you actually see what is that reality out there, that's really what the film is trying to poke at a little bit. I don't try and get too heavy, but it's just something I want people, I think we all have to kind of come to terms with that. And if we do, then the ultimate reality is the perception, the perceiving. It's not the reality out there. And this goes even for your body when you think about it. When you look at your hand, what do you actually see?
Right.
You see what I mean? How much of this is real and how much is it a perception in our mind? So our mind creates an image of the hand and we see the hand move. But what is actually, you see what I mean? When you get down to it, there's a doubt there. Things get murky when you really think about this. And that's really one of the key elements in the film.
It is about perception, because if it weren't, then the controllers wouldn't be attempting every single moment of the day to alter your perceptions. So they understand the whole concept of the fact that your reality is your perceptions. I find that many, many people do not contemplate very much, Robert. I'm not trying to be funny. This has been my experience. They don't contemplate anything. They don't think about purpose in life. They don't think about the construct of reality. Why are you here? What is all of this? How did all of this get here other than the simple explanation that God put it here? All of this stuff that is deeper thinking that I think more people, many more people, need to engage in. Because if we had a vast majority or a critical mass of people that did philosophize more, they were more intellectual about life, about existence, about consciousness, I think we would be on a far, far better path in our journey. Let me ask this. When the whole virus thing was introduced back about a year ago, were you surprised by how many people just fell in line with what they were told to do?
Yeah, I had a fascinating experience because I was teaching. So I'm a lecturer at a university, and I think it was in the middle of February. Was it? I'm sure you've seen that. Do you remember that the thing they did at Johns Hopkins, the game?
Yeah.
That came out in November, right?
Yep.
And it started to appear on the internet, I guess, in February. I'm sure your listeners have all seen that. No, so this was a mock virus, and they actually did a mock CNN report. It was, they didn't call it CNN, but it was like a mock news report of what would happen if a coronavirus hit the world. This was November. And I showed it to my students in February when this was just starting to hit the news here, right? And I never forget them looking, and it was like this look of, but what? Are you sure this is November? And I showed them the letter from Johns Hopkins because Johns Hopkins got a lot of flack for that. And they put out a letter saying we did not predict 60 million people would die, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, yeah, so there's the virus. And, my wife's a bacteriologist. I do a lot of translating of academic papers and stuff. So, I have no problem with, the fact that viruses exist and there are viruses and bacteria and all this stuff. So that there's something out there that is what we call the virus. And there are pandemics. Of course, these things happen. And then there's the story that they tell you.
Yeah.
Now, what is more real? Is it the story, the virus, the pandemic, actually people dying? So when I saw all this, for me, I was putting everything in its place. Okay, yeah, there are viruses out there, and viruses do kill people. Then there's a story of a virus, there's a pandemic, and then there's whatever agenda is being promoted. I don't know, did you read that article I wrote about, are you a clock or an orange?
No, I haven't read it.
It's all about this whole coronavirus thing. If folks want to check it out, it's on my website.
I'll put the link down in the description box as well, Robert. And the event you're talking about is Event 201.
That's exactly it. Event 201. Yeah. And watching Event 201, if anyone hasn't seen that, I'm sure most of your listeners have, but if anyone hasn't seen that, go back and watch that. And remember, look at the date and look at the names of all the people in that round table. All those names that later came up as the world's great epidemiologists, et cetera, et cetera. You have to look at things in, what is more real, the story, the actual virus? And then when you start talking about consciousness, well, when a scientist looks at a virus, what is he actually seeing? This is another, I asked my wife, who's a bacteriologist, and I said, do you actually look at viruses? She said, well, no, in the electron microscope, you can. But as a bacteriologist, I look at the results of a virus attacking a bacteria. And now, you see what I mean? That you get those layers and layers of reality. So, yeah, that's what hit me was I was able, I think, pretty early here. But that's because, you and I have been in this world for a long time, this kind of train of thought. But I think there's a lot of people who are actually, this is going to be their first sort of main contact with this whole paradigm, no? Unity, you could go back to 9/11, the 2008, and this is, for a lot of us, this is like the third or fourth run, but for some folks, young folks especially, this might be the first time they encounter this. So there's a real opportunity here to see reality and begin to kind of deconstruct it a little bit,
Yeah, so you're saying for many folks, especially the younger folks, this would be their 9/11.
Yeah, exactly.
The beginning of their maybe taking the red pill to start to question things a little bit more.
Absolutely, and I just want to say it's like I don't consider myself to be any kind of a guru or anything enlightened. When 9/11 happened, I was completely clueless. I started to understand 9/11 when the financial crisis happened. And I was like, what? It's just like one after another. You see what I mean? There's a process.
Yeah, no, it is a process. That's the thing I try to explain to folks as well. That's why I really try not to beat up on people. It gets frustrating sometimes because you do see things, like you and I will see things, and very clearly we will say, well, okay, this is some cockamamie story they're putting out there, and others will completely buy it hook, line, and sinker. But hey, like you said, it is a process, and everybody is at their own rate and pace. And that's why I put some videos out, Robert, where I said that when we come here, we are here to experience this realm.
Yes.
And it's part of our development, our soul's development, and it's an individual journey first and foremost, because no community can be stronger than its individual members. So if you have weak individual members, then you're going to have a weak community. If you have strong individual members who are resourceful and skilled and so on, then you're going to have a community that reflects that base of people. In the film, you present Joseph Campbell often, and some of our folks may not be familiar with Joseph. Could you give us a little background about who he is and why it is that you brought him into the film?
Well, yeah, definitely. And what Joseph Campbell, I guess, was most known for was the hero's journey. So he had studied mythology, all the world's mythology, and found a common thread. So he wrote a couple books that were quite popular, but he really came to the forefront in the late 1980s as he was dying. He did a 6-hour interview with Bill Moyers. Do you remember that? I think it was the mid-late 80s.
Yep.
That interview was on PBS, and it was just, oh my God, it was incredibly popular. But getting back to what you were saying about the stories, because what Joseph Campbell studied were stories. Myths are stories. And I just want to go back to that a little bit because it really is important. There are a lot of stories out there that you can buy into. And they're, like you said, it's to manipulate you. I mean, I worked in advertising. I told people stories to get them a certain percentage of them to have a desire, create a desire in them. And then a certain percentage of those people would actually act on the desire and buy what I wanted them to buy. But one of the keys to the film, and I think you would agree in life, how many stories that we believe are serving us well. And so, there's rational stories and irrational stories. I mean, some things we believe because they serve a purpose. But a lot of these stories that we believe, there's no rational basis for them. So it's like carrying around a bag of rocks. Is this story serving you? And if it's not, toss it out. There's nothing wrong with being agnostic. Like, I don't know. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, otherwise you're carrying around a lot of clutter.
Yeah. And are they serving you? And who is that story serving?
Yeah.
Because if it's not serving you, you can bet that it's serving somebody. And that's where I put the story of money in the film. I said, there's a story of money. This is what you think money is. This is what it really is. Is this story helping you? And then I try and tie in at the end, well, if money isn't what they say it is, maybe other things aren't either. But that kind of brings us back to Campbell, who studied mythology. And for Campbell, mythology was the truth in the story. That's the key concept that he said, if you believe the story is real, it's like eating the menu. The story is the menu, and it points to reality. But the fundamental reality is something you can never touch or feel or know. It has no qualities, and it has no story. That's one of the most difficult things to get. That these mythological stories point you to the base of reality, which is storyless and without qualities. And that's how we encounter the world, how we perceive the world, our consciousness, our awareness. When you really dig down, when you get down there are no stories. It's just is. And that's when the switch goes off or goes on, hopefully.
Yeah, it's very elusive for a lot of people to try to think through. It's a lot easier to not think about it, you know,
Yeah.
but that's not a good thing. And we do need to do more thinking, because by doing so, you'll have a much better understanding of your purpose in life. And what I have found, Robert, is so many people, they don't have a purpose. They might think they do, but if you really ask them to dig down deep and to come up with what their purpose is in life, what are they here to do, many of them will look at you with blanks in their eyes.
Oh yeah, and I think it's important for people to game it out, to say, look, this is my story, this is my narrative, and it's working for me well, and I'm happy. Then great. You know, if somebody is happy, be happy, and God bless them. But if you're not happy, just basically you just feel frustrated and something's missing and something's lacking, look at your stories. And if your story came true, if it all worked out, you got the girl you loved, you got the money, you got the fame, you got the big house, the fancy car, think honestly, is there still going to be that lack? Is there going to still be something there? Well, then you have to question your stories.
Yeah, that's a good point, because everybody's story is going to be different, right? No matter where you are in the pecking order.
Every story is going to be different, and it doesn't really matter. What matters is the story working for you, and is it bringing you what you need? And think, if you can be brutally honest, okay, it works out perfectly. I get the number comes up 6 times in a row that I need, and I get the perfect story. Or is it really going to make you happy?
Yeah.
That's the key. And if not, then you've got to think back, move in. Because the key, I think, when you reach a certain age, when you're young, I think young people need to go out there and have fun and do what they need to do. Go out there and do your stuff. But then there's a point when you kind of begin to look inward and you say, well, out there it's not making me happy. So what do? Do I just live with it, become stoic and say, well, that's life? Or do I look deeper? In looking in, you can find something else.
You had mentioned one of the stories in your film that I thought was great. You talked about money.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you could take the audience a little bit through why the money story is so important.
For me, and this is just kind of on my personal journey, one of the shocking things I found out was what money actually is. Because let's face it, in our society, money is the philosopher's stone. It has godlike qualities. And I use that scene from I love that scene in Breaking Bad when they go in the warehouse and she pulls up, that rug she has over the money.
Yeah, she's in the storage unit. Yeah.
And you just look at that. I mean, it was just so well done. And you look at that and you go, good God, what could I do with all that money?
Right.
So what is it exactly? This thing that can get you, and I'm not saying money isn't real in the sense where, you go out with $1 million and you can buy stuff. Of course you can. But what exactly is it? It's just a story that we decide to believe that runs our entire world. And the thing about the money story, it's the only story we all agree on. I mean, you could take the wildest Islamic terrorists, the Chinese communists, Putin, Trump, Nancy Pelosi, put them all in a room, and they would all agree on one thing. Cash is real. Those dollars work. That story they all agree on. So it's the one fundamental myth we all have. And it's just based on a story. How is money created? I mean, Mike, think about it this way. How many people could tell you, I teach at a business school, so I asked first-year students, what is money, define it, and how is it created? None of them can do that. I say, you're coming to business school because you want to make money, and you don't even know what it is. You don't even know how it's created. So if we don't understand that story, and we don't even know if it's really serving us well as a society, how can we expect to understand anything? That's kind of the reason I put that story in there, because it's the most powerful story there is. More than any religion.
It is very powerful. People chase the paper like there's no tomorrow. Well, most people do. It's interesting, Robert, when folks would sometimes say to me, it's not backed by anything. It's a fiat money system and all that. I say, well, I disagree with that a little bit. And they say, well, what do you disagree with? And I said, it's backed by consumerism. It's backed by your belief that it's meaningful, that it's important.
Yes. that is more. I was talking. I was like an hour ago talking with a friend about Bitcoin, and he's a real gold bug. You know, the serious gold bugs going way back. He's like, yeah, but gold is real. I said, yeah, gold is real, but what's the difference between gold and Bitcoin? In a sense, I mean, what can you do with gold? He says, well, what can you do with a Bitcoin? I'm like, well, what can you do with gold? It's like, well, you can. I'm like, but seriously, honestly, you know, if you're stuck on an island with a ton of gold, it's not going to do you any good. You could be on that island with a computer with a ton of Bitcoins in it or gold. It's basically the same thing. It's gold is a story. It's an amazing story. And we believe that story and it brings its value. And I have nothing against gold. I think gold is great.
Right.
I think it's great for people to have silver and gold just in case. I don't deny that. But in the end, it's also a story. And money's just a story. And is that story serving us? If you understand what it is, then you might begin to think, well, you know, maybe if we changed the story a little bit, if we understood what it was, and then we could tweak it a little bit. I'm not saying start a revolution, but, you know, we could probably come up with a society that was a little bit more comfortable and workable and equitable, no?
Let me ask this question. In order to do that, though, the people that control would have to relinquish their current mode of operation. In other words, they would have to say, you know what, I'm going to, or we're going to start doing things that are more beneficial to humanity. So how do you see that working? Even if everybody got more educated on this stuff, wouldn't it be contingent upon the people that actually control the mechanisms to make some changes?
But the thing is, and you just did a video on the fourth industrial revolution.
Yeah.
It just came out. It was really good. I was watching that today. Though the way that is evolving, it's going to come to the point where work is going to stop being the way that most people at least acquire a certain base amount of money. So that's why these ideas of a UBI are starting to become very popular now.
And that would be the universal base income?
Yeah, exactly. And these ideas are kind of floating around. And what happens is a lot of people think, well, how are we going to pay for it? That's the big issue, right? But if you look at modern monetary theory, which is now almost mainstream, for example, in certain parts of the Democratic Party, it's basically mainstream. And it's taking over monetary thinking, in a sense. And why? It's not because all of a sudden people are waking up to what money is. It's because with this fourth industrial revolution, they're saying, well, you know, folks, we have to explain something. This is what money actually is. And we can print this stuff till the cows come home. There's no problem with printing. There's a problem with resources. So you could overprint and use up all the resources. But up till we get to that point of consumption, we can print, and we do print. So it's kind of interesting that these two ideas are coming together because there's going to come a point soon, sooner than most people think, I would say within 10, 15 years, where we're going to actually have to come up with a UBI. It's going to be necessary. And how are we going to come up with a UBI? Will money equal work at that point? No, they're just going to print it and give everyone a couple grand a month. And then over that will be what you decide to do or not do.
I agree, by the way, that they're definitely moving toward a universal base income.
Mm-hmm.
What we're going through right now with this whole CV thing is part of the Great Reset. I mean, anybody who doesn't agree with me, all you need to do is go to the World Economic Forum, and you can go take a look at what they have published on their website. And that's Klaus Schwab. He heads that up. And we can see that they are attempting to fundamentally change the construct of the society, which includes the monetary system, currency, the way people work,
Mm-hmm.
the way people interact and communicate, and so on and so forth. I come from the school of thought, Robert, that, as I mentioned before, I'm here to have the experience. And while I'm doing it, if I see things that I don't like, if I see things that I think are concerning, I'm going to call them out.
Absolutely.
So when I say these things, I don't want people thinking I'm just sitting there and going along for the ride. But there is an experience that is opening up. And from a personal perspective, an individual perspective, I'm not going to be able to change everything that they have been planning for decades.
Oh, yeah.
It's been mapped out a long, long time. It's all project managed, and they're rolling this thing out. So there is a part of me that wants to see what happens. What is it going to be like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now?
I just want to say that I don't think people today understand where we are in that curve. We're in the middle of this wave. So we're so in the middle of this enormous wave that we can't see how big it is. It's impossible to get perspective. I mean, you and I think we're about the same age. You and I remember travel agents. We remember taking pictures and getting them developed.
Yep.
We remember the phone call that you would get. That's how you communicated. You know, your girlfriend would call you, whatever, a couple times a week, and it was a big deal. It's hard for us sometimes to swallow all that change. But remember, change is exponential. This kind of change is exponential. So what we've seen happen, it almost seems like it wasn't such a big deal, right? When we look back, it's like, yeah, things changed, but it didn't seem catastrophic. But it is. The changes that are happening now, like you said, can we do anything about it? No. I mean, it's like saying, the printing press or the internet or whatever. Can you stop? Can you put the genie back in the bottle? There's no way.
No.
There's no way. But we have an obligation to really push back on at least some of it, because we're not going to change the overall arc of what's going to happen, but we can change it a little bit. 1 or 2 degrees now, which might not seem like a lot, but in 10, 15 years, it could be a significant difference in the final outcome. But change the overall arc of history, it's not going to happen. I was talking a little bit about teaching, and the effects on young people.
Yep.
It's extraordinary the effects that, for example, just social media and phones is having on their brains. Because as a teacher, you see what capacity they have to concentrate. You see the levels of anxiety, their reading habits. I mean, we're going to have a generation that doesn't read a book.
Yep.
And we're going to have a generation whose attention levels are going to be very short, and who are addicted to dopamine hits from, so there's the normal social interactions, the type of dopamine hit you would get, say, 20 years ago, and today is completely different. So it's going to affect the way people interact in a face-to-face way, because it's not going to give them the hit it used to, because they're used to, 300 likes on my picture in Instagram. You see what I mean? That these things we don't know. We really don't know what the outcome is going to be for kids who have had these phones since they were 10 years old. And that's something we have to think about.
We do have to think about it. And you made a point earlier, which is a very good point. The thing that I've noticed, Robert, is, we will look back and then see things that are going on today, like, okay, this doesn't look right. This doesn't look good. This doesn't look healthy. But what I've found is that the young people, when I try to talk to them about some of this stuff, they look at me like I've got 3 eyeballs on my head. To them, this is perfectly okay. For most of them, they're just rolling along. In other words, they are adapting to whatever it is that's coming down the pike. The thing that they embrace is the technology.
Mm-hmm.
They love the technology. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that some of them are a little skittish, some of them are nervous, but at the same time, they are adaptive, and they are adapting to whatever it is that's being rolled out. And they will look back 5 years and 10 years from now. This is kind of my assessment, my guess. I don't think they're going to give it a lot of thought. I think they're just going to say that it's just the way things evolved. I mean, does that make any sense? You think I'm crazy?
No, absolutely, because they're completely in it. I mean, I'll give you an example. I remember I went back and watched a couple TV shows from the 70s that I remembered. Like All in the Family or, these type of shows, Happy Days. And I realized the programming in those shows, and I was shocked. And, I thought, how did my parents let me watch this stuff? I mean, because there was the message, there was the little narrative in the show that was fun, but then there's all this messaging that was going on behind it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God. So I think, like you said, when a lot of these kids, though, are going to look back and say, how did they let me walk around with a phone when I was 15, looking at, for example, allowing my social interactions to be based on a digital platform?
Yeah.
How did anyone let me do that? That's going to be one reaction. And the other thing I just wanted to touch on, because we didn't go into Campbell that much, but one thing Campbell talks about, tribalism. Tribalism is incredibly dangerous. Incredibly dangerous. And what's happening is we're having an increase in that form of tribalism, the dangerous kind, and it's digitally based. So what it's doing, we're seeing almost a renaissance of certain forms of nationalism, ethnocentric sort of thinking, but in a sense, the script has been flipped. Do you know what I mean? It used to be one type of person was sort of attracted to that. Now the whole other political end of things is being engulfed in this. And it's incredibly dangerous, and people don't realize what's happening. They don't see this.
Are you saying that people are essentially being put into buckets?
Exactly. Instead of identifying with, for example, in the film, I try and make the point that what's fundamental about us is our awareness. And there is no difference, absolutely no qualitative difference, Mike, between your consciousness, my consciousness, and a cat's consciousness, right? I mean, it comes through a different flavor, but that's who we are. That's what connects us. And today we're seeing in this tribalism that no, it's your gender identity, your ethnicity, your race, your social class. We're having a reversion back to that, which is incredibly dangerous. If you identify that as you, I am this sexual identity, this gender, whatever, race, etc., this creates buckets, and all those buckets can do, I mean, open a history book, is fight it out. And it's not good. It's scary.
Yeah, it's segregating the masses and compartmentalizing people. And it also puts people in positions where there's all kinds of judging going on. I don't like your bucket. Right? So people will be throwing rocks at each other. And, probably from the perspective of the controllers, it's more divide and conquer. The more I can get them to be chopped up, the more buckets I have out there, the better, because then they can't unify. They can't come together to achieve some level of critical mass in order to change something. As long as I keep them separated and stuffed in different closets, then we, meaning the controllers, will be better off for it.
Mike, it's absolutely 100% that's it. And here's my take on it, because I worked in digital media for about 10 years. I'm not even so sure that they were smart enough to see in the beginning that this could happen. But once they realized, oh my God, look what we can do. On the divide and conquer side, they have gone all in.
Yeah.
All in. And the only messaging you see now is divide and conquer. It's me against you, you against him against her, him. That's all you see. I remember even in the 70s and 80s, there was a certain sense that maybe we were making a little bit of progress on that front. No, maybe it would take time. Maybe things would change slowly. But there was a sense where we could have a common identity. And that didn't mean you couldn't go back to your ethnic roots, or you couldn't, have your sexual identity group or whatever. But there was a common identity that we were hoping would eventually kind of, you know what I'm talking about? That kind of,
yep.
That's gone. We need to have our sort of local in-group identity. Everybody needs that. You cannot be Mr. Global. You can't. It's not. In the film, I use a clip from Campbell that I think is really important. He says, there is no global mythology. So what are people going to do? They're going to go back into the smaller in-groups. In a good, what made, say, I think the United States at least work for a while was what people could have both. You could be in your in-group and have that identity, and then you can move into the common area and we could assume a little bit different identity.
Right.
And we could have two, and you get that balance, and it's good, because sometimes you want to be with your boys just hanging out, being you, and then you've got to have a public self where, you treat people a little bit, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And it's okay to have, I think we all need that. Everybody needs that.
Right. There's definitely a balance, and it's not this black and white switches on, switches off stuff.
Yeah. And we're putting people in the buckets of you're bad because of this, you're bad because of that. And you know what the end game is? The end game is to get all these people into a big bloodbath, and then they come in and they say, you see, we told you.
Yeah.
We told you about this. Now you got to jump on board to this global personhood thing. This is what your identity is. And if you don't like it, remember what happened last time. That's what I'm very afraid of. And what people have to is just step back, find out exactly who they are, and realize, we can slow this down a little bit.
It's interesting because when I look at the whole mask thing, it's peer pressure, right? So think about that. Think about the psychological aspects of what they're doing with the masks. So they've got most people are out there wearing masks, and if somebody doesn't wear a mask, there is this psychological oppression that people who can't wear a mask for whatever reason feel because of the way most of the other people that they're interacting with, how they behave, which is to wear a mask. So the reason why I brought this up is because as you were speaking, I thought to myself, gee, what's a recent type of thing that people can relate to where there's buckets?
Yes, it's a beautiful example. And it blocks your face. When you see someone with a mask, I was in the elevator with a girl the other day. She said something to me, and I said, "Who are you?" And she pulled the mask. I was like, "Oh, okay." You become like no person.
Yep. And this is, to me, like I said, this is an example where they've compartmentalized people and they've pitted one segment against another segment in order to create that conflict.
Yes.
And this is what's going on today. And I know a lot of people that have said to me that they just try to avoid going to the supermarket or going wherever because they just don't want to deal with the browbeating and the accusations and the dirty looks and stuff like that. And it's really a sad state of commentary, Robert, that this is what it's come to. Like you can't buy a loaf of bread or some milk without feeling this feeling in the pit of your stomach, like, oh, let me put on my flak jacket and head in type of thing, So I don't know. But I chose that because, like I said, we were talking about this compartmentalization, these buckets, and I think that was a good analogy.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful point, too, because I live in North Africa in Tunisia. And so when you I take taxis a lot because I don't drive here. So to work and stuff, I take it. So you hop in the taxi and, out of respect for the taxi driver, I'll put the mask on. As I'm putting it on, I'll kind of look at him. And if he's got it down below his chin, I'll tell him, do I need this? And it's so funny. I'd say about 90% of them are like, they'll use some expletive and then say the coronavirus, take off the mask. We start smoking, bullshitting. You know what I mean? It's
yeah.
But I'm not sure you can do that in the States anymore, but it's dehumanizing. And that dehumanization process, it's a control mechanism.
Yep.
Don't let any crisis go to waste. I mean, that's their favorite saying.
Yeah, that was Rahm Emanuel who said that going back about 10 years ago. Hey, we before we started the show, we talked about Joseph Campbell, and you mentioned that he had said, follow your bliss.
Yes.
And you and I talked about the fact that many people really don't understand where that came from. So did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Oh, I really did, because that's how I end the film. When you get to, I try and give it an uplifting end. It's a little depressing through the middle, but it gets to the end, and you and I remember this. I don't know if young people remember that interview, but in the interview, Campbell had a very famous phrase that he repeated many times. He said when he's talking to his students and they ask him, what should I do? He said, follow your bliss. And it became sort of a meme, back in the day.
Yeah.
Now, what happened was after he died, a lot of people went after him after he died. Campbell was a very bright man. So if you were going to attack him when he was alive, you had to be ready. But after he died, they came after him and said, well, that follow your bliss stuff, that's that 1980s new age nonsense of just, do whatever you want to do and you don't have to worry about anybody else. Now, when I was making the film, I was started to read the Upanishads, and I started reading the Gospel of Ramakrishna, which is sort of like it's a Vedantic school from the 19th century. And I found out that Campbell actually did the English translation. And there's something in the Vedantic text which is fundamental. It's Sat Chit Ananda, which means being, consciousness, bliss. When you understand the interaction of your being and your awareness, you find bliss. And if you watch the clip I use in the film, Campbell says, when you're really in it, when your being is really in it, that's when you find your bliss. And that's what he was talking about. He was taking a very, very, very ancient idea we're talking thousands of years ago, and bringing it to a modern world. He wasn't saying, go out there and do and have fun, take ecstasy and, chase pretty girls. That's not what he was saying. Something very profound what he was saying. And, it's funny, when we watched that interview back in the 80s, and, I didn't really understand what he was saying. And also that one section when he talks about the idea of God. No, it's a condescension of the infinite to the mind of man, and that's what we see as God. I didn't understand that. And I remember thinking, what is he talking about? When I finally understood what he meant, that was a key part in the film, because when he says it's a condescension of the infinite to the mind of man, what he's really talking about is if you see things as, if you see a universal awareness or consciousness as the base of reality, we experience it through our bodies. And that's what we see in gods, stories, narratives, archetypes, time, space, etc. And that was a key. When I understood that, then it all kind of came together towards the end of the film.
So to wrap up, Robert, with your film and the whole aspect of consciousness, what is the message you're trying to leave for your audience with regard to consciousness? Because depending upon different people, they're going to have different concepts of what consciousness is and where it goes and where it shouldn't go and all that stuff. So where are you trying to land them?
If we look at the materialist paradigm, is base reality is the material world, atoms or subatomic particles or whatever. And from that evolve human beings, and by some random mutation, we become conscious. We become aware. There's life, and then there's awareness. But it's a random epiphenomenon of the brain. That's the materialist worldview. There is another way to look at it, and it is base reality is pure consciousness. And out of pure consciousness emerges this world. So I guess if I had to say one thing from the film is, take a look at that paradigm that, Mike, wouldn't you agree, 95% of people believe that, oh yeah, consciousness is something that kind of pops out of my brain.
Yes.
Take a look at that. It might not, it's a story. Remember, it's a story. And as I use in the film, what's the quote from the guy from quantum mechanics? I'm forgetting his name now. But anyway, he says, you can't get behind consciousness. You can't get behind it in science. It's always there. So maybe investigate awareness itself, and it might shift a little bit the way you see the world. And it's an empowering shift, because it's something that you can, not only do you interact with it, it is you. That's who we are. And when you see the world that way, there's a shift, and it empowers you. Max Planck. I'm sorry, that's who it was, from Max.
Max Planck. Yes. I was trying to think of it also as you were talking. There's an interview, or a lecture, I should say, that David Lynch did, years ago back in Boston, I think it was, where he had said if you have a golf ball size consciousness, you'll have a golf ball size awareness.
It's true.
It is true. And I try to get that clip into some of my videos, and so people can take a listen to it. It's true.
And can you get around conscious? Is there anything that is outside of it? What are its limits? Who are you beyond just the fact that you're aware? How real is time? All of these questions, when you really think about them, you might say, Bobby's going woo-woo on me. I'm not. I mean, if you get into philosophy, they call it the hard question of consciousness, because no one has solved that riddle. It's the one riddle you'll never solve.
Yeah.
And the thing, when there's something profound in that, because you can't solve it, because you are it. It's like you're looking for your glasses, but they're on your face.
There's a small percentage of folks that really try to dig into the whole concept of consciousness, and it's so outside of the mainstream, like you were saying before about consciousness, the mainstream story, right? Because we're talking about stories, is it all resides in your brain,
Yeah.
And, I come from the school of thought that no, it does not reside in your brain. Your brain is like a biological computer, encodes and
Yeah.
decodes and stuff like that. That's how I view it. So anytime you talk about stuff outside of the mainstream parameters, Robert, people are going to think you're a little bit crazy, a little loony, a little woo-woo, whatever. But hey, whatever. That's how I look at it. I think more people need to open their minds and free think some more about the whole concept of consciousness.
Because there's one question I ask in the film, and I mean, it's not an original question for me, but are you in your body or is your body in you? And it's a very simple question, but if you think about it, it can kind of throw you for a loop. I mean, it's one of those simple things. It's like, okay, yeah, which one is it? Because if you decide that you are your body and you are your brain and you are those stories, okay, that's completely reasonable, and a reasonable person can believe that. But is that story, because it's a story, is that story serving you? And if you're happy, great. Don't do anything. I think if someone's happy, they should just keep doing what they're doing. But if you're not, maybe look at that story, and that little shift might help you find that thing that you feel like you're missing,
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a little saying that I use once in a while where I'll say, how did it all start? Was it something from nothing, or was it nothing from something? Right? It's one of those things where when you start to think about it, you're like, what? Yeah.
But it's the exact same question.
It is the same question. And it's perplexing because, and is there an answer? I don't know. I haven't found it yet. I mean, but it's important for people to think about those types of things.
Oh, yeah.
And get away from what we referred to before earlier in the conversation, from the veneer, and try to think a little deeper.
Because the veneer is not going to bring you any happiness. And just to poke a little bit at that idea of you haven't found the answer, but I think, and I'm not sure about this because I haven't solved it either, but I think the answer isn't in accepting that there is no answer. That because it's something the mind cannot solve. It's beyond the mind.
Yes.
And when you get to that place where you feel like it's been answered, it's not that there's an answer. It's just that you see it.
Yeah.
You experience it, and then you say, that's it. But you'll never be able to explain it. You see what I mean?
Yes, I do. And in fact, the whole concept that there has to be a logical whatever to whatever is presented, a particular argument or a concept, that's another bucket actually, right?
Completely, because it's like saying, can the most advanced computer in the world answer the question of what consciousness is? It can't. And what really, like you said before, in a sense, we're biological computers. That's what our brains are. So,
right.
There are certain things that you're not going to find the answer to. And the answer is beyond the mind.
Yeah. And maybe it's because part of your role, your existence here is to seek.
Yeah.
Is to attempt to seek the answers, even though the answer you may not be able to comprehend it in this particular realm, but it's the journey. And when you start from point A to point B in search of, there's all these other things that you learn in between.
Exactly. I tell my students the key to your life is the quality of the questions you ask. If you spend your life asking deep questions, profound questions, you'll have a life that feels meaningful. And you got to ask those questions. And sometimes it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Robert, where can people find your video? And also, I know you have a website. If you could just give us a rundown, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, if you just put my name into YouTube, Robert Bonomo, or you'll find it comes up quickly, Cactus Land. So Cactus Land is the YouTube channel. The film is free. It's on my YouTube channel. And I've made some shorts of it, so you can see there's a little short about banking that actually went out yesterday. There's a short on consciousness, and then you can watch the whole. I'd recommend watch the whole film though. It's only 47 minutes, I think. And so you'll find the 21 Faces of God there. I've rebranded everything so it's nice and neat and clean. Some of my articles, like we were talking about the coronavirus, I wrote an article. What was it called? Are you a clock or are you an orange? And that's on my website, cactusland.com. And there you have the films, you have my novels. My novels are free. You can get those. And like I said, if you watch this film and it resonates, I don't ask for donations or anything. It's free. But if you could get the word out there, if just, a link on Facebook, on Instagram or whatever, would be helpful. It'd be appreciated.
Share the links.
Yeah.
Yep, share them. And I'll put all the links down below, Robert. This has been another fabulous discussion. We spoke last about 2 years ago when you had the 21 Faces of God out. That's another fabulous film, and I'll put that link down below too. So, and your current film, Twilight of the Archons, does not disappoint. It really is a thinking person's film, and I loved it.
Thanks a lot, Mike. I really enjoyed it.
You're very welcome. And that concludes another Sage or Quay interview, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Links to my guests' websites and social media are listed in the description box below. And as always, I would like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog. You can find all my social media and web links by visiting my hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to check out my music and album releases. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone with the next show. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.
Day.